The agenda item is OSHA ETS, which is Emergency Temporary Standard. This is what you have probably read about or seen in the news. The federal government, through the authority of OSHA, is requiring all businesses with over 100 employees to implement certain vaccine and/or testing and mask procedures. This does apply to the town of Webster because New York State is a state plan participant under OSHA, and so we are regulated by PESH, which is a New York State agency, but the same requirements do come to us, which I will be honest is not what I initially thought when the President announced this a number of months ago. So I guess some of the things are, what are policy choices that the town board has versus what is mandatory under the legislation? Or not, it's not legislation, it's emergency temporary standard. So what is mandatory under it is certain things have to be implemented by December 6th, which, as we all know, is not very far away. The town has to adopt a vaccination policy that complies with the OSHA ETS. The town has to determine the vaccination status of each and every employee, obtain acceptable proof of vaccination, and maintain records and a roster of vaccinated status. We have to provide support for vaccination. We have to require employees to promptly provide us notice of positive COVID-19 test or COVID diagnosis. We have to remove any employee who receives a positive test or diagnosis from the workplace for purposes of workplace safety. Ensure that any employee who is not fully vaccinated wear face mask coverings when indoors or in a vehicle with another person. There's certain mandatory notifications and documents that we have to provide to every employee about the ETS, about their rights under it, and whatever our policy is that we end up adopting. And there are certain OSHA requirements we have to meet. So for instance, if someone had a work-related COVID-19 fatality, we would have to report to OSHA within 8 hours. And if there was somebody hospitalized, we would have to report to OSHA within 24 hours if it's work-related. There's certain records that we would have to provide within 4 hours to OSHA if they were to make the request to us. All kinds of good stuff there. By January 4th, the town has to, as an employer, ensure that those who are not fully vaccinated, if they're in the workplace, that they have to be tested at least weekly, and that they have to wear face coverings anytime they're in the workplace. All right, so policy choices that the town has. The first is that employers can adopt either a mandatory vaccine policy that says everybody has to be vaccinated with the exception of reasonable accommodations under either the ADA or religious based accommodations, or the town can adopt a policy that allows for weekly testing and mask wearing for those who are not vaccinated. So that's kind of the biggest policy choice that the town has. Other policy issues are if the town adopts weekly testing and mask wearing, what is the town's role as an employer versus the employee's responsibility when it comes to obtaining those tests, paying for those tests, and is it done on their time or on work time? Other things that would have to be in the policy that the town will have to make decisions on are what happens when an employee is non-compliant with the requirements. Are they unpaid, suspended? Are they, given warnings? Are they terminated? Things like that. And the last factor is not so much a decision, but it is the intention of OSHA. Their statement is that their ETS supersedes all local and state laws on the subject, and that essentially, if you're in a collective bargaining arrangement, we have unions, right, and there are certain rights and obligations under the law. But this has to be implemented, and so the question would be is, while doing the implementation, you know, a union in your state would have the right to bargain the impact of that implementation. Okay? So they would not have the right to interfere with the policy decision of implementing it, but they would have a right to negotiate the impact of that. Again, the key dates are December 6th and January 4th. The penalties are the OSHA penalties of $13,000 and change dollars for each occurrence, and up to $136,000 for willful noncompliance. There's also a penalty for employees who provide false information. So if an employee were to give a false test or a false vaccination record, I believe that's a criminal penalty, and we're required to notify the employees, give them that information about that, so that they, you know, make informed decisions about compliance. OSHA website does have model policies, that two of them, one for the vaccine mandate path, and the other for the weekly testing mask wearing alternative that we can use as a basis, so that any policy that the town does adopt is compliant with the requirements. And they also have all the mandatory educational material that we're required to give to employees, and they have actually a quite detailed FAQ on questions that I spent a decent amount of time reading, because there's a myriad of questions whenever there's a new mandate. What is the status of the OSHA ETS? You may have seen that federal court panel out of, I believe, Louisiana.
Fifth Circuit.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sissy
Yeah, has put a stay. I think that's a correct term. Might be a temporary restraining order. I would defer to any lawyer, because I'm not a lawyer. But there's going to be legal action in multiple federal jurisdictions in different courts across the country, and that'll probably get consolidated, and there'll probably be appeals, and so.
So my question, I apologize for interrupting.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm almost done.
But I read through this, and my opinion of this is wholly unconstitutional. In a number of states, attorney generals have filed, because it is, in their interpretation, wholly and significantly unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess because of the Fifth Circuit has issued a stay, why would the town of Webster consider implementing policies that I believe 27 states' attorney generals have determined is unconstitutional?
I think ultimately that answer is for the town board.
Amen.
My perspective on it is from the responsibility that I would have to implement. And so if the stay were overturned, and we hadn't begun the work of preparing policy, and also the work of informing employees and collecting the vaccination records, then we would absolutely end up out of compliance. We don't have a lot of time. That's the essence of the ETS, the emergency. They say, you got 60 days to get the whole testing in, 30 days to get all the documentation in line. I'm not thrilled by that, so that's an understatement. It's at least, and Charlie, please weigh in, but I think...
Oh, I've got plenty of questions.
Oh,
I think...
you hear these.
On the federal court jurisdiction, whether that stay applies only to the states that are covered by that court, or does it apply to the whole country? It was my understanding that it only applied to states
Generally,
that are covered by that area.
apply to that circuit, but it depends on what I haven't read the decision.
Yeah.
Yes, our circuit is a second circuit, covers Connecticut, New York State, Puerto Rico, and maybe one other state, I can't, maybe it's Vermont, I think. That's it. It's a big deal because it's, it's New York City, there's an awful lot of litigation in New York. And also, I think we can reasonably expect that it's unlikely that our Attorney General and the Attorney General of Connecticut, both of which are very liberal states, are going to be bringing a constitutional provision. So this is hopefully going to get fast-tracked to the Supreme Court. Hopefully. My question is this, it's temporary. We don't know when it ends. Does it have an end date, or is it similar to Cuomo's permanent emergency orders, which are supposed to be 30 days at a time, but the legislature allowed him to continue and continue? And you may not be able to answer that question. I'm not.
I have an answer. Just trying to resist all that cheese you're leaving for me. The OSHA FAQs say that it's for at least 6 months, but that they'll be evaluating and stuff. So it's not a promise to only go 6 months, but it's at least 6 months.
So I think this is somewhat analogous to our emergency orders that we had from the government. Those EOs kept on coming and coming, but they were, of course, approved by the state legislature. In this case, it's an agency. They are making rules, but they have apparently have the effect of law. But they're not actually legislation, correct? As far as
yeah, I mean, so we're going to get into an area where my knowledge gets shallow, but it's my understanding that the regulatory scheme that they decided to pursue is that Congress did authorize in law OSHA to make emergency measures, right? That could basically go into implementation much faster than the normal regulatory process, which is you publish something and there'll be months and months of comment and review and revision. And, usually the regulatory process goes very slowly so that everything is heard. But there's
so they have
provisions
to take
for
their
fast.
responsibility by handing it over to unelected bureaucrats, is basically. Yeah, that's my opinion, but I know it makes it problematic because then it's harder to attack because who do you go after? You go after OSHA, but it really, you have to rely on people like the various attorneys general or other litigators to bring these proceedings in federal court. Because it's federal. You really, this would bypass state court, so we have to bring it to federal court. And as was done down in Louisiana, it would have to be brought in the fast track to the circuit courts. Circuit courts are sort of the appellate divisions of the federal system.
And it puts, it puts the town in a very difficult position.
Sure.
You're the policy deciders on that as the town board. My perspective, it puts the department heads, in a very difficult position because, they have an obligation to follow workplace safety regulations. There's nothing new about that. They always have that obligation. It's just the federal government is using those existing regulations in a way that they haven't before. So I mentioned the penalties, and I don't know if there's risk of private action from somebody who could be, catches COVID and says they caught it because we, as an employer, failed to follow.
Or someone could sue the town because their vaccination
Well,
status
this just opens it up
general
to
assumption, period.
all sorts of
Yeah.
It sounds like,
litigation,
to me, it's-
potential abuse. Yeah,
to me, it sounds like that we should prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Be prepared, get the policies in place, and when we're told we absolutely have to implement them or be under penalty, then that would be the time we would, but not until. I mean, by that time, if we're prepared and all the things you suggested, we do choose which policies we want to choose, notification to all the employees and the department heads of the possibility of coming procedures that are going to be implemented, if we get that all done and wait to find out what jurisdictions we're under, then we're prepared. I don't agree with it, John, any more than you do. But I'm also not prepared, I also would not be prepared to put the town in a position where we would be responsible for lack of implementation of laws that are being forced upon us. And be responsible for the penalties that might be incurred if we don't do it. I mean, it's just, you know,
We have 13 days to have it completed, December 6th.
the first part.
It's not a lot of time.
The first part.
And as Braden has emphasized, thank you, by the way, it's a good, thank you for your presentation, thank you for this. We are a OSHA-approved state plan, or under an OSHA-approved state plan, which means we are, we have to comply. And
Well-
and put under this horrific time burden and potential loss of funding, and God knows what other sanctions they could apply against it.
The good news is that Councilman Abbott is a very good engineer, maybe not a good mathematician. It's about 21 days, I think. December
14 days.
6th versus, oh, well, you are a good mathematician. Bad news is, I would imagine we would have to adopt this at the Thursday, December 2nd board meeting. Barry, you said it perfect. I couldn't have said it any better than you said it, so I'm not going to be redundant to what he said. Braden, Charlie, would it be in our best interest we draft something that we're ready to adopt on December 6th? To what Barry said, I hope in this fluid nature of what's going on, how many days between now and, what'd you say, January 4th? That
January 4th is the testing requirement.
sanity comes in, but we gotta have this passed. And I would just say, and I'm with Barry and John, I just can't believe that this is where we're at. But it is what it is, and I think we would, well, Barry said it all. We can't thumb our nose at it. So, Braden, I know you and I have talked about this. If you remember when you came to me a week and a half ago and presented it, my face turned green. I really, honestly, I wanted to throw up. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. That we're gonna be going down this path.
Well, at what point does the general population or this town board, at what point do we say no, okay? At some point, and you can look at industries out there, that this mandate has been forced upon, are saying no. The pushback is nationwide. So at what point, and it's a question, at what point is enough with COVID and the push for these vaccinations?
I couldn't agree with you more, but the people that are pushing back aren't aren't government entities.
I understand that, but they're individuals and they are people. That's where I'm coming from right now, okay? And we represent these people and these unions.
If you and I owned the town of Webster, we could make that decision on how we felt about this, but we don't.
Okay.
We work for the residents of the town of Webster, and what kind of responsibility we're responsible for this. And it's not good. It's not good.
It is not good, and it's unconstitutional.
And hopefully, in the very near future, somebody will step forward and say, there's a permanent stay on this for the entire nation.
Yeah. And
But until that time, we need to be prepared.
This is unconstitutional, and we don't want these policies put forward, okay?
Well, but I agree with Barry, we can say that, we can take that stance, but as town officials, we have to be prepared for it.
We don't want to be in a position that we may not agree with it, we might not do anything, and then we get a fine for $30,000. I'm not going to pay that fine.
No.
And
Or one of our employees passes away from COVID, or gets permanent whatever from COVID, and we haven't followed the rules. And then we're responsible for that.
Well, there would have to be a connection. Yes, you're all right. The bottom line is, you've all heard this phrase from the time you were kids, hopefully. We're a nation of laws, and as imperfect as this is, and it's really a regulation rather than a law that has the effect of law, the force of law, we've got to follow. You have a responsibility, I guess, to the policy, whether we like it or not. And we have other remedies, I guess, legally and politically.
Well, I mean,
But we're gonna have to face the fact that there may be, some of our employees are gonna say, I'm not gonna comply with this, and I'm gonna leave. And God bless them. And, you know, it's happening all across the country, people are doing it
Yes, it
everywhere, they're making that stand.
Barry, to your point, I was with a couple of couples a few weekends ago that work for some major corporations that, 30,000 people worldwide. And those corporations are flexing their muscles and not giving any latitude to weekly tests and asking. They're just saying, if you're not vaccinated by this certain date, you're fired. We've seen it with the hospital systems. We've seen it. And that's private industry. I know that, Ray, you and I talked about, there's latitude in this. You mentioned a few of the things. When you first brought it up to me, I thought it was going to have to be daily testing for the non-vaccinated, which was like, oh my God, how do we? But now you said I think it's weekly.
Yeah,
So we need to take a look at this and come up with the policy that the board will be voting on December 2nd. And I know this, I would not advocate for, something very draconian where, yeah, if you're not vaccinated January 4th, you're fired. We'll try to give as much latitude on this with the hope that common sense prevails in a stay or a, whatever. We never have to implement it on January 4th. But
Is there
Of the
anywhere
two
in that
options.
that allows for religious exemptions?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to confirm that, all right? And I would hope that this town board would consider utilizing for our employees the religious exemption.
And
That's up to the individual.
OSHA FAQs
I understand
have specific links to the EEOC's guidance on religious exemptions. And I think, though, that the religious exemption would mainly be most pertinent if the town adopted the 100% vaccine mandate, because I think that the most reasonable accommodation is weekly testing and mask wearing.
I do too.
Which if the town adopted that policy, that would be most often the case. But every single case is unique, and every case has to be weighed in with what that person's rights are and what the accommodation requested is, and it's reasonable to the operation and to the safety of employees.
So Brayden, as we're putting this together in the next however many calendar days, business days, dovetailing to December 2nd. And I don't want the town board to have their first glimpse of the proposed policy on December 2nd.
I wouldn't think that would make a good policy.
Yeah. Are we gonna, obviously we see where the union stands on this.
Did they say that the administrative
It's
procedure
required, it almost doesn't matter what the unions think.
Yeah, so sometimes you have to negotiate something with a union before you implement it.
Yeah.
Particularly if there's something in a contract that, has been previously agreed to, right? Or you can't just change these things. But, I haven't found any provisions in the contracts yet that address this situation. Of course, there'd be nothing about COVID, but, public health emergencies are well over 100 years old, right? Or maybe they're since the beginning of time. But what would be the negotiation? What would be with the union is, we'd say, look, this is what the intended plan is, or this is what the policy that the town board adopted, and the union would say, okay, well, what about if an employee, this happens to them, how are you going to handle it? And then we would have negotiations, small n, not capital N. which are essentially that you know, you should be working with your labor partners and come up with rules that make sense and that are fair. But when it's small end negotiation, if you can't have a meeting of the minds, the town still implements. Whereas if there was a provision in the contract that already existed and we were engaged in capital end negotiations, when the parties don't agree, then it goes to arbitration,
Yeah.
and you don't implement until after that's resolved.
And let's layman term to what you just said. In a lot of ways, on the small end, you know what, union, the federal government wins on this one, not you. The town has to really, you know, pay attention to that. And
It's not a matter of winning.
And
Well, you know what I mean.
I know what you
mean,
mean.
it's just, and
It's a lose-lose, this whole thing is a lose-lose situation for everyone.
there's only so much discretion. You know, the discretion is mainly around what happens when somebody's non-compliant, and how are you going to, you know, who's going to be responsible, right? Is the town of Webster going to set up a health clinic and you know, have a nurse on call to take everyone's COVID test? That won't be my suggestion.
no.
But if we were a massive industry that could not afford to risk losing a single person, then having an occupational health on facility set up like that might be a really good business decision.
You got all full-time employees, union employees, non-union employees. Also the permanent part-time, this is the facts, seasonal part-time.
Yes, yes, the OSHA did not make the count based on full-time versus part-time, so it's all employees, and it's basically anybody employed, okay? So it's your planning board, zoning board, conservation board members. You know, it is all the people working in the rec department. So, you know, with all of our seasonals, we have 370 people that we have to know the vaccination status of. And then whatever percentage of them, I don't know, I think maybe the population in this county is like 70% fully vaccinated, maybe. Maybe we replicate that. And so then that's tracking, well, it's 30% of 370, about 100.
110.
What is it actually called? You know, it's going to ask me to play card tricks.
it's actually 111, but it's,
There you go.
it's not split.
111. So then, every week, we're tracking records for 111 people. And they're medical records, so, you know, due care is required.
Who would be doing that?
We're looking at it.
That's what I thought.
Yes, with I'm thinking of a decentralized model where department heads are the first line of responsibility for their workforce.
Well, you may get some pushback on that, because I don't know if every department head in the town of Webster is going to be comfortable going to their individual employees and asking them what their vaccination status is, because it's, in my opinion, it's none of their business.
Yeah, that could definitely happen. From a HR standpoint, it's not dissimilar to anytime we ask somebody for a doctor's note for an absence. Right? You give that to your direct supervisor / department head,
Yeah, we'll
then it gets
disagree with that,
filed
but-
in the HR department in a separate medical file under lock and key. Same thing here in one sense. In one sense, something completely different,
Yeah, I would disagree with that analogy.
and that's fair.
Yes.
Well, I mean, unless there.
We don't have a choice. We have to
Right,
have a
we'll work
policy.
on, we'll have something, and you won't see it the first time on December 2nd. I think I know how everybody feels, we'll try to make it as manageable and whatever is possible within the, you know, scope of this law. And Barry, you said it best, we hope we're just checking a box and that common sense prevails and we never have to implement this on January 4th. And if we do, aren't you glad you're retired?
No, it'll still make a difference to them.
I know. We live in interesting times, that's for certain. We live in interesting times. Well, and you know.
Well, it's typical of the government
Can I
that's
tell you
running this
something?
right now,
Bill,
that's for sure.
Bill, did you watch the October 28th tape on the public meeting with Sandbar Park?
No, I have not yet seen that.
Okay, well, I'm paraphrasing, but one of the people that said, and you know, why don't you town board members or whatever get some guts and tell New York State to go rub rock salt, all right? And it got a lot of cheers. Well, the town board really should not be telling the state government and the federal government to go rub rock salt, because where we might feel good about that, we just did a total disservice to the community. Because there will be ramifications for that.
Because they hold the cards.
And it's not just $13,000 fines. I feel very confident about that. That those federal government agencies interact, and you know, I was in the mortgage business. Let me tell you something. We'd get people applying for FHA loans. Everybody knows about those? And all of a sudden they say, nope. You reneged on a student loan 19 years ago that was backed by the federal government. Out. That's true. Happen all the time. I don't want the town to get the scarlet letter of being the one who reneged on the student loan 19 years ago when we go to get maybe a grant or something like, are you kidding me? You're a pariah as far as we're concerned, town of Webster.
If we
That's
get-
serious.
If we get the
We need
scarlet
to
letter
understand.
instead of a red A, can we get a red W?
Well, I guess that might end the meeting, Braden, I guess you and I have some work to do, and we'll pull in various people. Charlie, you might have to chime in. Pine, and